Happy Monday, everybody. Appreciate everybody that's tuned in an hour late. Couldn't be helped. Sorry about that. Um, Good to be back after having last week off. Feels like it's been a minute since we have done this. A lot of different directions we could go. Clemson football is back officially, at least for the media starting tomorrow. Clemson has their big media day. You get Dabo Sweeney, get all the assistants, and this year we're going to get some of the other assistants that you don't usually hear from, guys like Taj Boyd, Brandon Thomas, Thomas Allen, the son of Tom Allen, not the defensive coordinator Tom Allen, but the son, Thomas Allen, all those guys that have like assistant linebackers coach or assistant quarterbacks coach, all those guys are going to be available tomorrow. Gilchrist, the special teams coach, is going to be available tomorrow. So it'll be a little bit different, a lot more content than we normally get on that day. So a lot of we can, if you got something legitimate that you'd like to be asked of one of those guys, drop it down there, see what we can do. Before we get too deep into this, want to thank our sponsors over at A-Glass. Take care of all your auto glass needs. They do replacement, they do repair. 2 locations in the PD, one in Florence, one in Sumter. Give them a call today, tomorrow, the next day, whenever you have any kind of auto glass needs, or you can get yourself a free quote, myaglass.com. A lot of different directions we could go again. The football season officially starts, for at least for us in the media, tomorrow. Then we go on and have ACC media days next week. And I would imagine, we haven't gotten a schedule yet, but I would imagine practice will start sometime the following week. So probably about 2 weeks away from practice getting started. I imagine it'll start sometime the last week of the month. But a lot of stuff have happened in the recruiting world since the last time we were here. Bryce Perry Wright goes to Texas A&M. Blake Stewart commits to Clemson. Just a little while ago, Tyler Atkinson announces he's going to announce his commitment tomorrow on the Pat McAfee show. That might be a first. I don't recall anybody else doing that. So a lot of different ways we can go. The baseball draft just wrapped up. Don't think there were any major surprises there. I thought Canarella went about right kind of in the range where I thought he'd go. Too bad it happened to be to the Marlins. Weidman probably went a little bit higher than I originally thought he would, but I never thought he was going to make it to campus. I was surprised that Gerald wasn't drafted. I thought he might be a late selection. Malstead goes a little bit higher than I originally thought he would, but no major surprises coming out of that. So wherever you want to take it, we shall go. You already got a lot of stuff over here. Steven gets in first. What does the Stewart commitment mean for Clemson's chances with Tylen Wilson? It means that Tylen Wilson will not be committing to Clemson. They were only going to take one more safety, and Stewart's kind of been the one trending towards Clemson for a while now. Wilson hasn't, but the number's going to be 3. So when that, I forget what day he's going to announce. He's already set a commitment day, but whenever that day does come, don't expect it to be Clemson. Is Clemson now going to back off Perry Wright completely, or will they continue to pursue him until he officially signs with Texas A&M? If that is something that, every situation is different, but if Clemson is going to get back involved in this thing and start pursuing him again, It'll probably be him that has to open that door. This thing, I don't think anybody is doubting the fact that this thing turned into let's just call it what it is, bag chasing. There's some insane numbers floating around out there. And if some of those and some of those are most of them are actually probably inflated at least a little bit, but if they're even close, I mean, we're talking about giving that kind of money to a kid that's never played a down of college football. I just don't think that's something Clemson's going to do. I don't think you'll ever see them paying an incoming freshman straight out of high school more than their veterans are making, which probably would have been what it would have taken to kind of win that thing. I just think that's how big of a gap there was. And we're talking about a guy we don't even know. Barry Wright projects to play on the interior. He's like 6'2", 6'2.5", 6'3", 260, 265. There'd been some talk about Clemson maybe starting him at end and then moving him inside once he adds some bulk. I mean, he's kind of a tweener at this point. He's got the frame to hold the bulk, but he's a little bit of a tweener at this point. That's a lot of dough for a guy that, and it's a lot of dough for a guy that's never played a snap and, is not. Don't think he's going to be able to play day one at defensive tackle. You probably have to start him at the end, and I don't know that he's got the length to play in. I mean, it's a lot of dough for a lot of unknowns, and I just, at a certain point, you have to decide whether a guy is worth that kind of money. Is a guy worth overspending on? You got to put a value on him, and if it starts getting too far over what you value him at, you just got to let it go, man. And I think that's just kind of where you are with Perry Wright. How much of it comes down to money? I think that was pretty much the deciding factor. All things being equal, I think Perry Wright ends up at Clemson. If you watch the commitment ceremony, the announcement or everything, and he's going through each of his finalists saying what he likes about each one of them and called Clemson his dream school. Then when he got to A&M, he says he thinks it's going to be the new defensive line DLU or however he said it. I don't know, and nobody will ever know this for sure, but it did not feel very organic. It kind of felt forced, maybe like somebody told him to say that. There was one of the Clemson assistants that actually took exception to that and tweeted it out, about Texas A&M being DLU. But this one really did come down to the money. And if let's just say, for example, hypothetically speaking, if you got school A, B, and C over here offering X, and then you got school D offering double what these other schools are offering, I mean, it's hard to fault a kid for that. I mean, it just kind of is what it is, and it's the world we live in. Again, you got to decide what a guy's worth or what you're willing to pay him, and how are you willing to go over that amount? How much are you willing to go over if you are willing to go over? And at a certain point, you just got to say, hey, that's too much for us. And I think that's kind of the way this thing played out. Any updates on injuries for returning players? We should get all that tomorrow. As far as I know, all the offensive line guys, that missed the spring, were all on track to be back by the fall. Like Tristan Lee and Walker Parks, they were all, just kind of still recovering. Elijah Thurman would kind of be one I'm interested to see where he's at, after his injury late last season and that surgery. Kind of interested to hear where Jay Haynes is at coming off the torn ACL. But we'll find all that stuff out tomorrow. Goodbye, Weidman. We hardly knew you. Yeah, I've never made any bones about it. I never thought he was going to make it to campus. To be quite honest with you, he's been, I had a good long conversation with him right after he committed to Clemson, and he was pretty transparent about how he's always dreamed of playing in the Major League Baseball or playing in the major leagues and hearing his name called in the draft. And, it was pretty easy to read between the lines and kind of infer that Clemson was always the backup plan. I think he would have had to drop pretty far to consider playing another year at the college level, but he actually ends up going higher than I thought he would. I figured he'd go somewhere in the first 5 rounds, but I thought it'd be 4th or the 5th. He ends up going into 3rd, well over where he was ranked. Pretty good slot money there, and he'd probably be able to get more. If his agent can negotiate it right. It does lead you to wonder who's going to play center field next year, though. But having said that, with knowing how transparent he was with me, I got to think he was even more transparent with the coaching staff, and they've had to know all along the chances of him ever playing for them next year were, pretty close to 0. Hard to believe the Perry Wright decision was not about money when a school enters the picture at the last minute, pulls a kid from his lifelong dream, and gets him to commit within days. Yeah, sometimes it's easy to read the writing on the walls. And I get it. That's a miss that stings. And not just because he's rated a 5-star by one of the services or, a high 4-star by some of the others. Not only because, he projects to be a really good player, but he's a guy that, for 18 months, he's been kind of trending your way. And then all of a sudden, bam, somebody just comes in and buys him right out from under you. It's kind of been the era we've been operating in for the past few years, but it doesn't make it any easier to take. But at the same time, no one recruiting miss is going to be the end all be all. There's no one miss that's going to be that devastating. It's just another guy you missed on at the end of the day. Yeah, Atkinson is going to announce tomorrow. How do I feel? I don't feel any differently than I have felt, except maybe where it sounds like Texas is kind of the school that's getting all the love right now. I probably would have pegged Georgia as the favorite because he's from Georgia and the sentimental pool and all that. And, but he's always been a guy that plays everything so close to the vest, knows exactly what to say to the media. He knows if he knows what to say to the media, then he knows what to say to every coach he talks to every day on the phone. So getting solid intel on him has been next to impossible, but it does look like Texas is getting all the love tonight since he's announced that he's committing tomorrow. Good that you go ahead and get it over with, though. That let's assume for a minute he does go to Texas or heck, even Georgia or wherever, anywhere but Clemson. Then you can go ahead and move on and, determine who you're going to target next. I think, DQ Thorpe was probably a pretty good candidate. He picked up an offer last year before Wes Goodwin was let go and Allen was hired and Boulware was promoted. Once those two guys kind of took it over, Clemson kind of started from scratch at linebacker and really put the focus back on Tyler Atkinson. Fortbull was actually supposed to announce a commitment one day last week, I think it was, in the last few days, and decides he's going to put it off. That's also a good sign. You want him to put it off so you can get the Atkinson decision behind you, and if you miss on him, you can go ahead and move on to Fortbull. So we'll see how it plays out, but I've never thought Clemson was going to get Atkinson. I think Boulware deserves a lot of credit for even getting Clemson this far into this thing. When the season ended last year, Clemson was nowhere on Atkinson's radar. After Boulware was promoted, that's one of the first things he does is get back on Atkinson. Boulware, Dabo, Mickey Kahn, they all go pay him a visit. Matter of fact, Boulware made multiple stops up there back in January, get him to come back and visit in March for the first time in a long time. Heck, they got him back for the big official visit weekend. I think Boulware did a hell of a job here. And even if he doesn't win out, which I don't think he will, that doesn't take away from the kind of job he did here and the effort he put in. Feel like some recruits put Clemson in their Final Four just to show they've got an offer. Since we put out so few, do I think we actually have a shot with Atkinson? I think Atkinson really likes Clemson. I don't think that Clemson's in the Final Four just to show that he got an offer from Clemson. Now, there are examples of guys putting Clemson in their Final Four when they're not even a take any longer. I mean, don't get me wrong, it happens. I just don't think that's what's happened here. If we were ranking the schools in order that Atkinson likes the best, I would put Clemson in the top 4. But probably in the top 3, to be quite honest. But you look at let's take Darius Gray, for example, who just released his 5 finalists. And he's an offensive lineman, and he's got Clemson listed among his finalists. Clemson's already got 6 offensive linemen. They're not taking another one. I mean, he's not even a take, but he's listing Clemson as a finalist. Somebody else did that a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember. It might have been Craig Dandridge, or maybe it was Sadarian Morgan. I can't remember. It seems like it was one of those receivers that was no longer a take. Clemson had on the table during his announcement. I mean, it happens. I just don't think it's the case here. Where do I see Clemson going with the last scholarship? Clemson's got more than one spot still left to fill. So, I mean, you still got to have a running back. You still got to have a linebacker. I don't think the door's completely closed on taking one more defensive lineman. So, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I don't have any new names to give you. I don't even know if Clemson's sure which direction they're going to head yet. Say like at running back. I know they're not I don't even know if they fully decided they're going to pursue another defensive lineman. And linebacker, I'd probably go with Forkpa, just because the staff's familiar with him. They've had him on campus a few times. Matter of fact, again, like I said earlier, they offered him last year. It's just when Allen came in and Boulware was promoted, they just kind of started from scratch and went back towards Atkinson and put Forkpa kind of on the back burner. But he would probably be the one I would look to next once Atkinson comes off the board tomorrow. At running back, I think Jay Allen Terry is a name to watch. He had a pretty good showing at camp last month. Coaches told him they wanted to see some junior film before they, got as far as offering him. So we'll see which way that goes. But, there's still a long time between now and December. Woods looks slim down and in top shape. Woods came out and said, late last year, it might have been after the season, I can't remember, it might have been during the spring, that he had basically put on some bad weight last year. But yeah, I saw him last month, I think it was. I can't remember. It might have been. I've seen him within the past few weeks. And yeah, he's definitely, he looks like he's put in a lot of work in the weight room. I'm very curious to see where he's at come the weigh in. Because you remember last year when they first talked about moving him to defensive end, and Dabo talked about how, they wanted him around 290. He never got close to that. But, this is money year, man. This is money year, and he knows it. Wonder if Tristan Smith starts the first game. Unless Clemson runs out there in a 4-receiver set to start things off, I would say no. I think your 3 starters are TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco, and Antonio. But, I also don't think it really matters who runs out there first, because I think they're going to rotate Tristan Smith in there, Tyler Brown in there. I think you're going to see a lot of rotation with those 5 guys, and probably some of Cole Turner in there as well. It's going to be interesting to see how they divvy up the snaps, trying to keep all those guys happy, because there's a lot of depth at receiver. When we're sitting here wondering, right, talking about whether Tristan Smith starts or not, that kind of gives you an idea of the kind of depth they've got. But yeah, my money would be on Wesco, Antonio, and TJ Moore. But I don't think it's going to take you long to see Tristan Smith at all. Again, I think they're gonna do a lot of rotating with those top 5 guys. Is anybody gonna ask Gilchrist about field goal protection? Guaranteed. And probably about punting too. How is the baseball team going to be after the draft? Who'd they miss out on that went in the draft? Really the two big losses were, and they were expected. So, I mean, it's not like they came out of left field or anything, were the Weidman kid to transfer from Western Kentucky and incoming freshman Dax Kilby, who actually went before Canarella in the first round. A high school shortstop, one of the top shortstops in the country. For me, once Weidman is officially drafted now, and you pretty much know he's not coming, the only question for me is who plays center field. And I think you got some options. I just don't think you know who's going to be yet. Let's not forget 3 years ago, going into Bakic's first season, nobody had any inkling that Canarella was going to play center. I mean, that kid was, an infielder coming out of high school, and they put him out there and seen what he can do. And all of a sudden you got a superstar defender out there. I think the kid from Georgia has played some center in the past, so maybe he's an option, but it'll make for an interesting fall. Oh, yeah, I didn't even mention this in the opening. Clemson has got their quarterback for 2027. That happened while I was on vacation last week. Kareem Hughley, 4-star kid out of Gainesville, same high school Deshaun Watson went to. He worked out at camp last month, but he worked out on the day that I was not there. I had to leave for one day, so I missed a day, and it just happened to be the day that Hughley worked out. I have watched some of it or his film. I just did it Sunday when I got home. I like this kid. He's probably the lesser known name of the 4 offers that went out. But there's a lot to like about his film, man. He's got a live arm, always keeps his eyes downfield. He's a little bit, Garrett Riley's definitely got a type. All those guys they offered in this class were around 5'11", 6 foot outside of the Gerard kid. You go and look at the Denson kid they took, he's 6'1" or whatever it is. Look at Tate Reynolds, he's like 6'1". So Garrett Riley's definitely got a type. Caught everybody by surprise too. He was having I got to talk to him on the phone yesterday for a little while. He was just having a regular, I think it was a FaceTime call with Garrett Riley. And then at the end of the conversation, he tells Riley, hey, I'm interested in committing. I want to commit now. Bam, just right out of the blue. I had actually talked to him the first time on the phone last Saturday, a couple hours after he went public with his offer. Matter of fact, I was driving down to Miami, heading out on vacation when I was talking to him. And he told me that day that he was probably looking at announcing sometime in December, maybe around state title game in that time frame. And then 4 days later, bam, he's committed. I asked him, what changed? And he said, the longer time passed after he got the offer, he realized that he knew where he wanted to be. And there was no reason for him to even take this thing any further. There wasn't any reason to stretch it out to December, not to mention the fact you got 4 offers out there for one spot. So it's kind of like a first come, first served deal. Why not lock it down now? But there's a lot to like about this kid, and he's still got 2 more years of high school ball, man. He takes care of the football. He threw 20-something touchdowns last year and only 2 interceptions. There's a lot to like about him. Now that you've also, it's the 3rd summer in a row that Riley's got his quarterback locked up early. You get your quarterback locked up early and he can go start recruiting for you, man, because basically he's going to be the face of the class. Looking forward to media day tomorrow. Are we going to get any news about the help? Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, I would absolutely expect the update on anybody that was banged up or missed part of the spring or all of the spring, and get an update on guys like Jay Haynes and, again, Elijah Thurman, those kind of fellas. Thought the settlement was going to have guidelines to stop the buying of players. Actually, it's the opposite. the settlement actually now allows schools to directly pay players. What it does is put some guidelines on the NIL stuff. It's got to be legit. That's why you're starting to see a lot of these collectives shut down. The 110 Society at Clemson is no longer. All that's folded into IPTAY now. It's the NIL stuff that they're trying to make it legit and not just pay for play. But Texas, with the settlement for this year, schools can spend up to $20.5 million on student athletes, and each school gets to decide how they want to spend it. And if you got let's say you got a school like Texas A&M, or a school like Texas, or a school like Michigan, who have, these big time boosters with deep pockets that own businesses. That's legit NIL if you've got them advertising for your business, and you pay whatever the market allows. So no, the settlement didn't stop the buying of players. Schools can pay them directly now. What it tried to do was just put some guidelines on collectives, just paying players to do nothing besides sign. Is Olsen Jr. the starting tight end? That would be who I would say right now, unless something changes. He was banged up some during the spring too, so he'll be one of those guys we'll have to get an update on tomorrow. But I think the redshirt season probably did Betancourt a lot of good. I think we'll start to see a lot more of him this year. He's not quite as tall as Jake Brenningstool, but he's kind of a tight end in that same kind of mold. He's like 6'4", but he's not 260 or anything. He's not a big blocking tight end, but he's a guy that can go out and make some plays in the passing game. But yeah, I think Olsen Pat Henry is probably going to be a start tight end. So who feels worse, Clemson or TP, now that Weidman is gone? Well, again, I don't think that it was any secret that Weidman had eyes on going pro. That's something that coach, I guarantee you, that coaching staff knew, and I guarantee you that was relayed to TP Wentworth. Yeah, but a month ago, 6 weeks ago, right after the season ended, he's probably the guy I would have thought was going to be your center fielder next year. But for whatever reason, he decides to take off. But if you look at it from his point of view, Clemson did bring in several guys that are capable of playing the outfield. And Wentworth wants to be a two-way guy. He wants to pitch and play the field and hit. It's a field level video clip of Hughley on X. His arms are huge already, and he throws bullets with no heart like it's a casualty. Yeah, he's got a live arm, man. He's got plenty of arm strength, that's for sure. He's really good at throwing on the run too. Man, that felt like it flew right over the top of my head. Yeah, there's a lot to like about him. Again, I'll be the first to admit, I'd never heard of Kyreem Hughley until the day they offered him. A lot of that if I'd have been at camp that day, I'm sure I'd have knew who he was, but I wasn't. I thought that Gerard and Seaborn were prime candidates to get offers once the board expanded. I figured that would probably be a little later down the road, but they hand out 3 new offers on July the 4th. Hughley didn't go public with his until the next day, but Riley called him the night of the 4th. So again, he's probably the lesser known name of the 3, but outside of Gerard, there's a lot of similarities between all 3 of those guys. I'm sure there are some people out there that are disappointed just because his name doesn't carry the same kind of weight as a Peyton Houston. But at the same time, that doesn't mean he's not going to be as good as Peyton Houston. You got 4 guys that you really like enough to the point where you're going to offer them. You're going to take any of those 4 you can get. Don't you think Clemson already knows what Atkinson's decision will be? Probably found out today. Very likely. But going back to, there's been some instances here in this class they didn't find out to the day before, the day of. But yeah, I would seem like I would venture to guess they probably found out today. With the loaded receiver room, how hard is it to keep them satisfied? Who is going to be Klubnik's top target? Yeah, I talked about that a few minutes ago. It's going to be, it'll be a challenge to kind of get them all enough targets. But it's kind of a good problem to have. You'd rather have the depth to not have it. As far as who the top target's going to be, it was Antonio last year. I'm going to stick with Antonio this year until I see otherwise. Seems like he only answers YouTube posts. Not true. If you're watching on Twitter, the comments on Twitter do not show up. But if you're watching on Facebook, if you want the comments to show up, you have to comment under the live feed on the TCI page. If you're watching it out of a group or watching it off of my personal page and commenting under there, they don't show up here. You have to do it either on the YouTube feed or the feed right there on the TCI Facebook page. Otherwise, they don't show up. I'm not ignoring them. They just don't show up. People on ESPN going nuts over Sellers. I know he is good, but you think Cade is better. First of all, who cares? He doesn't play for Clemson. He plays for South Carolina. Who cares about people going nuts over Sellers? Do I think Cade is better? Yeah, he should be. He's been there longer. He's been doing it longer. I've made no bones about what I think of Lenores. He's one of the best high school quarterbacks I've ever seen. He actually reminds me a little bit of Cade, not from a play-in standpoint, or I'm not comparing their games or anything like that, just kind of how their first seasons played out. A lot of good bit of bad mixed in there, just some inconsistency with both of them, in their first year as a full-time starter. I would fully expect Sellers to take a big jump this year, assuming that this is going to be some big assumptions here, but let's just assume for a minute that he's got the offensive line and he's got the pass catchers around him. There's going to be there's going to be a few young receivers on that South Carolina team this year from guys that reclassified from 26 to 25. But I mean, if he's got some weapons and he's got protection, I think he's going to take a big step. But this is still only his second year. Cade's going into his third year. Cade should be the better, more polished player at this point. I have not seen Jay Haynes this summer. No. How many more guys will be in this class? Southern Cal has 30. Again, what Southern Cal has no bearing on what Clemson's going to have. Clemson still needs a linebacker, a running back, and possibly another defensive lineman. So I see them somewhere, 22, 23, maybe 24. But I could also see them not taking another lineman and seeing where they are next year, and if maybe they decide to do what they did this year and go grab one out the portal. No worries, man. I don't think I need to do a better job of reminding of putting that out there, because I don't think a lot of people realize that if you post under the live feed in a group, it's not going to show up. It's got to be under the live feed on the TCI page. I try to mention that from time to time, and I forget it. I need to do a better job of putting that out there. Think we could rotate 6 wide receivers in the game and not lose much. You could definitely do 5 for sure. You got those first 3, and then you got Tristan Smith and Tyler Brown. We'll see where Cole Turner kind of fits into that. So I mean, again, though, I mean, it's a good problem to have. You'd rather have the depth than not have it. We'll see. Maybe who knows? I don't know. If I lean towards thinking Tink will probably be a defensive back at corner this year, but I mean, he's a guy that's been a wide receiver too. Who knows if maybe he gets into the rotation? Probably not, but we'll see. I would expect Juju to take a red shirt, but yeah, I mean, those first 5 are good, man, and we'll again, I've said it many times. I think there's a role for Cole Turner to play in this offense. Don't want to see him out there starting, but I think there's a role for him. (2027) only one QB take. Yes, only one. They took 2 in 26. Who are the up-and-coming linebackers after Sammy and Woodez? Trust these 2 can avoid major injuries. One of those is one of the transfers, Jeremiah Alexander. Got D. Creighton, Kobe McLeod, who's coming off an injury. And you got Jamal Anderson, who's, to me, he's a little undersized to play inside. We'll see what happens with him. He's another one I'm going to be curious to see where he's at come weigh-in day. You got Drew Woodaz, who redshirted last year. But the main pieces behind Sammy and Wade Woodaz will be Creighton, McLeod, and Jeremiah Alexander. Why did we lose out on Samari Matthews? What happened there? I thought he was high on Clemson. That one kind of started trending in an opposite direction a while back. For a while there, it looked like South Carolina might end up winning that thing. It looked like Florida State had a little momentum there a while back, but that one kind of went the money route too. He didn't even come to Clemson for an official visit. Clemson kind of just knew that was heading in a direction that they weren't going to go. With the recent success in men's basketball, do you think more high-profile recruits will come to Clemson? If you've, well, you better hope so, because this era, this NIL era, with collectives just raising money to pay kids. That's where Brownell has excelled, man. That's how he's built these rosters through the portal. It's these new guidelines are gonna impact his program, big time. It'll be interesting to see how that thing plays out for him over the next couple of years, because basketball at Clemson's going to get a lot less rev share money than most of the other programs in the ACC, particularly schools like North Carolina, Duke, Louisville. They're going to devote a lot more money to basketball because Clemson's given pretty much, the overwhelming majority to football. I think basketball is getting like 11% or something like that. Football 87, and the rest is for all the other sports, and that comes out to less than $1 million. So I think Clemson's going to have a lot less money, than most of the people they're recruiting against in the portal for basketball. So it might put more of an emphasis on the high school stuff, and with the way some of the results over the past 4 or 5 years, it certainly can't hurt. What do I think about the comments Brian Kelly made today about Clemson? From the ones I saw, I didn't think there was anything really over the top or egregious. I think it's trying to be, unbiased here. I think it's pretty cool that they've got, the Tiger Paw up in the weight facility. They've got 1-0 on all their screens in there inside the building. They're putting a lot of emphasis on this game the same exact way I expect Clemson's doing. And I would expect him to say nothing other than their stadium is the real Death Valley, even though everybody knows it's not. Clemson was calling its stadium Death Valley before LSU was. But I wouldn't expect him to come out and say it, but I do think some of those comments give you an idea into exactly how they're viewing this game, man. They're putting a lot of emphasis on it. It's a game they feel like they need to win. And it's probably, it might end up coming out to where it's it's a game LSU needs to win. I don't think Clemson needs to win it because they just need to win the ACC to get into the playoff. And the same could be said about LSU winning the SEC, but it's much more difficult to win the SEC than it is to win the ACC. Let's just be honest. So if you're LSU, you can use that, that feather in your cap of getting a win over a top 10 team to open the season. If you're, looking to lock up a at-large berth later down the road. Have they expanded the board at linebacker? No, they never had plans to until after Atkinson announces. Like I said earlier, I don't. A lot of people's going to disagree with this, but man, it's July. I see the reasoning why they zeroed in on Atkinson and rode that train all the way to the end. If it plays out longer than that and he stretches it out into September or October, then you got to start, looking at other options. But with him making a summer decision, I don't think it's that big of a deal. And you also got to remember that just because somebody doesn't have an offer doesn't mean Clemson's not recruiting them. Again, go back to the DQ Forkba kid. They offered him last year during the season. He visited multiple times. Then after West got let go and Boulware got promoted, Tom Allen was brought in. They kind of started from scratch at linebacker and went back to Atkinson, and everybody else was put on the back burner. But they're still recruiting Forkba. He told me a few weeks ago that he was hoping to get back at Clemson at some point. He just didn't know when yet. And it's easy to read between the lines there. He's got to wait and see what happens with Atkinson because the staff's telling him that. And, again, he's a guy that was supposed to commit here recently, changed his mind, pushed that date back. That's, if you're a Clemson fan, that's a good sign. Don't want to hear that and get that into any player's ears. It's a must-win for Clemson too. No, it's not. Even if they win the ACC, it's all they talk about. I say it's bigger for Clemson. If all you're worried about is perception, then yeah, it's a must-win. It's a must-win for perception. I mean, obviously you want to break the 3-game losing streak to the SEC, but I'm specifically talking about the playoff. You do not have to win against LSU to get into playoff. All you got to do is win the ACC, which is much easier to do than it would be if you were in the SEC. And then once you get into the play, not to mention the fact you're going to get a shot at another SEC team toward the end of the season. And if you were to win the ACC and get that automatic bid, you're very likely to face another SEC or team or two once you get in. So, no, I don't think it's a must-win from that standpoint. Not saying you do not have a valid point, because you do. If Clemson loses that game, obviously the narratives are going to start about the SEC and stuff. But, man, it's one game. It's a season opener. If they were to lose that game and let's say they go 10-2 and win the ACC and go win a couple games in the playoffs, nobody's going to care about that LSU game. Now, having said that, I don't think they're going to lose. I think they're going to win. I've already said that a few weeks ago. I just don't. I think it's more of a must-win for LSU than it is for Clemson from a playoff perspective. What's a reasonable expectation for Randall at running back? I think that's a pretty good question. I fully expect Randall to be the guy that runs out there first against LSU. I've kind of gone back and forth on this thing. I was not a big fan of this move at first. But the more I heard about his performances throughout the spring, the more I started to believe that, hey, this there might be something here. We didn't get to see a lot of him in the spring game, so we didn't really get to see him in action. But I think it's important for Clemson to, you saw what happened last year when really all they had was one running back that they trusted. Even after Moffitt gets hurt and he's basically playing with one arm, they still keep running him out there because they didn't have any trust in any of those other guys. It took all the way to the ACC championship game before they really started to give Jay Haynes an opportunity. And from some of the things I heard, I understand why they did it. So going into this year, you would hope they learn from that. You got to have more than one running back ready to be leaned on at any given time. You're not going to make it through the season with just one featured back. So you hope to get Gideon Davidson up to speed. You hope that he's taken a big jump in his development after redshirting last year. And watching him in the spring game, he looks like he's in the midst of that. At the same time, I still think he runs with the ball. He runs a little too upright sometimes. Still got to work on that. But and then you got a couple of wild cards, and Jarvis Green and golly, I'm forgetting somebody. I forget the other guy in there. I'm not talking about Keith Adams. Seems like there's one more guy I'm forgetting. But as far as a reasonable expectation for him, dang, that's a good question. If you get 500 rushing yards out of him, man, I think you got to be plenty pleased. Plenty pleased. My biggest question for him, is he going to be able to hold off that freshman? Or how long is he going to be able to hold off that freshman? Because that guy's physically ready to roll. If he gets the pass protection stuff picked up, I think he'll be the one running out there first sooner rather than later. Think the Louisville game is more important than the LSU game playing there on a Friday night. If I had to pick one loss on the schedule right now, that'd be the one. That'd be the one I pick. Clemson's had a bump or two playing on Fridays in the past. I think that Louisville team's going to be dangerous. It's in Louisville. That would be one, if I was picking them to lose a game, if I had to pick their schedule, win losses right now, that's one I'd probably pick them to lose. Because I never pick any team to go undefeated, man. It's just so hard. It's hard to do. You're more likely to drop a game or two, but that's definitely one of those ones. I think the Georgia Tech game is one worth keeping an eye on. That one's in Atlanta. I really like what Brent Key's doing there. They still might be a year away, but it's worth at least keeping one eye on. Absolutely, man. There should be no SEC, ACC, Big Ten, or Big 12 football games on a Friday night. I think there should be no college football games on a Friday night. That should be left for high school. I think it looks cheap when you got Power 4 teams playing college football on a Friday night. I think it's just a bad look, man, all the way around. They ought to be illegal. Oh, man, saying watch Randall turn into the next Eric Dickerson. I think everybody would probably be happy with that. All right, man. I want to appreciate everybody that tuned in tonight. Even more so, I want to thank you for bearing with me and joining an hour later than normal. We'll be right back here next Monday. Talk about everything we heard at Media Days tomorrow. What happens when, if Clemson misses on Tyler Atkinson tomorrow, which direction they go, what happens, all those good things. So right back here next Monday. And before we jump off, we want to thank our sponsors over at A Glass. For when you need a glass, A Glass. 2 locations in the PD, one in Florence, one in Sumter. They'll take care of all your auto glass needs. They do replacement, repair. Look them up today. And you can get yourself a free quote, myaglass.com. Right back here next week. Check us out, Clemson Insider. We're going to be loaded with content from tomorrow all week long. ClemsonInsider.com.